cottage. Free range eggs. Logs for sale. This is the Graithwaite Estate. So I'll have to look up and see who owns the Graithwaite Estate. See what info I can find out about it. And I'll add it to this video. Whoa, no, hang on. Well, as I was just about to say, that was a bad accident, and that car's been flipped over and it's facing our way. And the cream car on the right, looks like they were involved in that accident. I bet somebody might have been trying to pass somebody. You don't know, do you?
Flip the car over.
We asked the kids if they were all right, and I'm saying kids because they were all young, and they all got out safely, but shaken, obviously. And yeah, he's just letting people know there's been an accident. Flash them. That's what they know, that, don't they? I don't know how they've got out safely. I really don't, because that looked bad, didn't it, Ray? Really bad. But you see, these roads, you shouldn't be speeding. You should drive carefully. Even if you know the roads, still drive carefully. It's other people that can cause you an accident, or you can cause it if you're speeding like an idiot. And the young ones today drive like they know the roads, or they own them. That'll be a wake-up call for them, unfortunately. Maybe fortunate in a way that they've all got out okay, but it might be a fortunate wake-up call for them that you don't mess with roads that bend like this. You know, because of the bends, it might have been like the other ones coming, because they were definitely coming that way, the other cream car, and they were shaking up like hell. She was crying on side.
300 yards, turn right.
So we're going into that part of the wood now. Did you notice those birds, the yellow bird, I think they were yellow and brown birds that were flying, there were two of them together at the campsite. Really nice and colourful they were. Look, there's a little bird that thinks he can, well, he can actually outfly us. Yo, is he leading us the way? Oh, that's Beatrix Potter would have put that in her tail, saying the cat, a little bird leading us. That was good, that.
Got to be a better way to fish, surely.
No, Ray, this is the only route in. This is Beatrix Potter's garden. How it was. Nothing's changed. And that's our house.
This is kind of miniature figurines. Okay. A picture of these little jugs here.
As you can see, that is Beatrix Potter's house. It's gorgeous inside. You weren't allowed to take flash pictures, but I've taken some. And I've got some little tales to tell because his brother was also an artist. And what I'm just looking at, look at this on the walls outside. It's just amazing. Little honey pot, honey nest. And like I said, this is her little garden. But you can completely understand why and how she lived here. And the green gate.
So this is a single cast 2-ton flywheel, so it's a considerable piece of metal to spin. There were some accounts in some mills of the flywheel just breaking off and then ripping through the mill. It's such a large piece of metal spinning so fast, you really can't stop it if it decides to do that. But this is why they'd be quite grateful to have this. This is the governor. It spins twice for every time the flywheel spins once. And centrifugal forces work upon it so it then spins out. As it spins out, it knocks a valve into the steam engine, cutting off steam and so slowing the whole thing back down again. So it's quite a clever piece of kit and definitely worth having when you are running the steam engine at full pelt. We still run the steam engine every bank holiday, so if you want to come back and see it in action, feel free to do that. There is just one left this season though, so if you are planning to come back for that August bank holiday, make sure you book just so that you definitely see. Had that piece of wood dried out properly, that knot would have hardened. You've then got the possibility of it damaging your tools. They were using ash, alder, sycamore, hazel and birch. We use a wider variety of wood at the moment because we're not making this really. If you covers it, we'll have it. The real skill in making bobbins was maintaining your tools. So they have a little slipstone. Whilst the machine's still running, they were getting there, sharpen up the edges on the tools. But if you were to hit that knot and if to damage your tools, you have to take them out. So as you can see, there's quite a few screws holding that tool in place. You take those screws out, take the tool out, go upstairs to the grindstones, regrind the metal, bring it back down, reset the tools, and in all of that time, you're not being paid. You're only paid for the bobbins that you're making. So maintaining your tools was a very key skill. And a very key skill in the apprenticeships, the boys working here, they're making sure only good quality pieces of wood would come through. So as I said before, we don't use such good quality pieces of wood. You can see here there's a little defect. It's not quite big enough, so you've still got a bit of bark on. None of these would have made the grade. We just don't use good enough pieces of wood.
From here, where were they all sold to?
All over the world really. So a lot were going down to Manchester, but they were making it as far as India as well.
The main market was the cotton mills.
Yes, yeah. For these ones, definitely, yeah. And for here, that was...
Was that generally the size that they made here?
No, so you can see there's the templates here, the string bobbins, they're all variety of sizes. But yeah, it could be any size.
All for mill, mate. End up here.
I will explain that bit later, because it's, yes, there is a good reason why it's here.
I'm sure there is.
But I will explain slightly why. Part of the reason, well, it was all very sustainable. So as you might have noticed, our lathes are from Fells of Windermere, all the iron within, local iron. All the belts are from local tanneries. Tie down was built just up the way. It's a way of supplying here with water and so power. All the wood was local, everything very local. So that's part of the reason, but I'll give you a bit more later. This was one of the top jobs in the build, also one of the youngest lathes. So this lathe was used by 2 men during its life, and they were both on this machine for 13 years each. Wow. This is why it was quite a good industry to be a part of, because they were living into their 70s and 80s working here. It does mean though that if you were wanting to move up, that if there was somebody on here for 30 years, that you did have to wait. It was that dead men's shoes saying came into play really.
Was it like any generational workers?
Sorry?
Was there anything like generational workers? So son would follow the father?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
There's the houses across the way, that's for the boys from workhouses, and then up the way there's Finsway, which is the village, so you would have families living there that then could follow it.
How many worked in here?
I was just going to ask that.
Well, in this room, the whole building, it was about 20 to 30. You've got all of outside as well, so coppicing wood and storing them in the barns, bringing it all around. This is about an average size, so there were some that were slightly smaller and quite a few that were sort of 200 or so. So it was, this was average really.
Do we know how many bobbins were made per day or per week?
We do. It's a number that I always forget. So it was a lot. They were making about 120 on that machine. So it was kind of, what I'll do is I'll ask Tracy at the end.
All right, okay.
Number.
I didn't quite understand what that machine was doing.
So it's boring. It's
boring
the
the
same
holes.
as the borer. You're boring
Oh,
holes.
right.
In fact, this machine right here behind you guys is the one doing the smaller ones. So as you were asking before, with the little blocks, why they had holes in, this is how they were getting the holes in.
Right.
And they put holes in, so presumably it could sit on a spindle in the cotton mill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this one's not got the light.
Yeah, exactly. So
Oh, God, look at these smaller ones.
Here, which is why, they had holes in, but they don't because we put the wrong holes on.
Is this the original machinery or is it a replica?
Yeah, no, they're all original machines. So there was a bit of a gap between the mill being a mill and then taken over in this capacity. So a lot of the machines were taken out and then brought back in. So they're not necessarily exactly where they would have been, but in the guidebook we've got photographs of this room, and most of the lathes are pretty much in the same place. The finishing lathe has been spun around so that you can kind of see how it works, but it basically is how it would have been, but there was just that little gap in between where things were swapped over.
Would they have people who specifically maintain the machines, like things like oiling them and what have you?
So probably this is one of the things that we're not 100% sure on, because the bobbin makers were maintaining the tools, but we think there must have been somebody running about in between everything and making sure it's all running, because it's not, it's a lot of responsibility to maintain them in that sense as well. So we'll head upstairs. If you guys want to head up those stairs there, if they're too steep for anyone, give me a shout and we'll go up the other ones. And if you want to gather in the room on the left when you get up there. So you can see there's a fireplace in the corner over there. That was not to keep the workers warm, that was to keep the glue warm. So larger 3-piece bobbins being used for industry, they were stuck together with animal glue. Keeping that warm by the fire made it a lot easier to use. It does mean though that if you had to come and sharpen your tools on the grindstone, this was one of the few warm places in the mill. So this is one of the examples of one of the tools. It's this edge here that they're bringing up to regrind that could get damaged. The tools were the bobbin maker's own. So if they could get them in a cheap and easy way, could get that metal in a nice cheap way, they would do that. Most of the bobbins were taken off-site by horse and cart. So should one of the cart springs break, grab hold of that, take it to the blacksmith, get it formed into a tool. This meant you could go and work somewhere else as well. If somebody was on that finishing lathe for 30 years and you wanted to move up and you could get employment somewhere else, you could take your tools and go and work there. Whilst they were their own tools, there were certain circumstances where your tools could be taken from you. So nowadays there's no difference between being fired and sacked. Back then there was quite a big difference, and it was your tools. So if you were fired, your tools were taken from you, refired, made into something else, not given back to you. If you were sacked, your tools were taken, put into a sack and given to you to leave. So nowadays, not much difference, neither particularly pleasant, but back then, definitely better to be fired than sacked. No, sacked and fired, so we'll head up into this room. If you guys would like to head up, just gather in the middle of the room. And mind your step again, forever.
Do you know what stones used for the grinders?
It's a Yorkshire sandstone, I think. Yeah, the steam engine and the grindstone are from Yorkshire, and that's about as far as anything came from. They were iron, so I don't know whether they might have changed as it went along, but yeah, iron. So this room, we're back in the original mill building here, so we started sort of just down below and underneath there. This room originally was the lathe workshop, so you can see one of the original lathes just over there. There would have been one of those in each of the windows, just making the most of the lathe light. But as the new lathe workshop was opened downstairs, this area then became the bobbin polishing area. So bobbins would come up from downstairs, they'd have a bit of dust and a bit of shavings on them, so they'd be tipped out into the sieve, shifted around, making sure all the dust and shavings fell through, and then pushed back down into the basket. So this is another job for the boys. They'd be running downstairs, grabbing a basket, cleaning them, polishing them, running back down, grabbing a basket, cleaning them, polishing them. If anybody wants to feel the sieve, they're more than welcome to. It's nicely polished itself over the years, illustrating the fact that really all you need to polish wood is wood, but they were using a little something else here as well. So we'll just head over to that barrel there. Just another reminder of my step, especially on that spot bit there.
So the bobbins going in and out of the sieve.
Look at these.
No, this is where the barrels come in. So yeah, they don't, just because the sieve got polished, they would get slightly polished because they're rubbing against wood, but this is really where the barrels come in. So any barrel would do. That one is an old whiskey barrel. You'd fill it about halfway full with bobbins, grab hold of a lump of beeswax, chuck that in there as well, grab hold of the belt, which is attached down to the line shaft underneath, wrap it around, get your fingers out very quickly before it caught, and then it would set it off spinning. So you've got this barrel, another one over there, there would have been a third one set up So with that sound, or the sound of the machines running downstairs, you can see why it's worth keeping the shavings around, just to deaden the sound. So this method works really well for the one-piece, one-way bobbins. The speed that it's spinning, they're all knocking against each other, they're knocking against the inside of the barrel. The beeswax melts with all the friction, so it nicely just softens the edges by knocking them around and then varnishes them with the beeswax. This works really well for the one-piece, one-way bobbins. These are one piece because they're made from one piece of wood, one way because these went into people's homes and they never came back out again. They weren't reused. But with the larger three-piece bobbins, these are the ones being used for industry. These are the ones that were being stuck together with animal glue as well. If you were to put these into a barrel and roll them around, it was likely that they would break. So these were varnished. They would use a mixture of shellac and methylated spirits. There are certain qualities for methylated spirits though, so this job was saved to the end of the day because they didn't want people breathing in those fumes and then going downstairs and operating heavy machinery. But this is one of the possible origins for saying happy hour, because they'd have quite a happy hour at the end of the day and probably go home quite happy as well. So once the bobbins were cleaned and polished, they were then ready for distribution. So they'd be sent down this corridor here. If you guys would like to head down that corridor as well, there's the drying room at the end, have a little look in there, and then gather in the gallery on the left.
Can I just take a picture of this? Is that all right? I do arts and crafts.
Oh, yeah.
And I use a lot of bobbins.
Yeah.
I have to pick them up at anywhere we can get them. Do you sell them here as well?
We sell these kind. Bobbins were sold by weight. So they would be weighed on the corner, taken up these stairs. We are built into a hill, so the back door up there goes back out onto ground level. So the bobbins would be taken up the stairs, put out onto horse and cart there, and then taken down to Lakeside and have a freight railway for distribution. Back then that railway was connected to other railways, so it was a viable way of getting things out of the Lake District. A lot of the transport links that industry took have since disappeared in the gap between industry and tourism. So this area here is where the boss could have overseen what was happening down on the shop floor below. It's also where grease monkeys would have operated from. So boys of about 8 to 10 would be sent up that ladder just there, and they'd work alongside that line shaft on those planks. Generally speaking, the work was undertaken at the beginning and the ends of the day, so they didn't have to go up there whilst it was moving. But should for any reason it need greasing during the working day, they wouldn't stop it for them. It would mean all work down below would stop, everyone would stop being paid, and the reason they're being sent up there is to keep everyone working, so it would be counterproductive to stop it. This leads quite nicely onto injuries, so we have no evidence of any injuries in the mill. They just didn't write any of these things down, but we're sure that they would have happened. It's very similar to that path in the shavings though. As long as you stick to what you know, you do the right thing, you're unlikely to come to any harm. And there is something to be said for experience. It is quite a good learner. If you were to lose a finger on a machine, it's very unlikely that you would do that same thing again. It's not necessarily a very nice way of learning, but it is effective. So we'll just head back around this corner and I'll show you some of the things made here as well as bobbins. And if you want to have a look down here, the steam engine's just below, so you can get a different point of view and you can see how this gets warm when the steam engine's running, because all the steam comes up here. So, as I mentioned, right at the very beginning, the mill was opened in the 1830s and it was open until 1971, so it was open for quite a long time, and by the end of it the Coward family had owned the mill for a while and they were well invested in the mill. So as plastic was coming in, they could see that they...
Were children still working in the mill in 1970?
No, I can't remember quite what it was. There was, it says in the barn, there's an act that came in for, I think it was 8 to 10-year-olds. So then 10 to 14-year-olds were employed, and then it shifted its way along. So it unfortunately did mean that as children were used less, that people who didn't have skills to do other things were brought in. So it was, yeah, good that children weren't working here, but exploitation didn't end basically when children were booted out. It was definitely you were getting the lower people, I'd say. Yeah, the Coward family were well invested. They could see that plastic was coming in. They had lathes here. A lot of bobbin mills had bobbin making machines specifically by that time, but they still had lathes. You could put anything on a lathe and turn it. So they started making other things like rungs for rope ladders, toggles for duffel coats for the navy, spindles for the backs of chairs and chair legs. They were making croquet mallet heads. They made little drawer handles, light pulls. Basically anything you can put on a lathe and turn. They were making, but everything you can put on a lathe, you can also make cheaper out of plastic. So as much as they did a very good job of outrunning it for a while, it was just too much. Plastics were just too cheap. So the mill closed in 1971, but the Coward family could see that the industry was dying and with it the heritage being lost. So they decided to see if anybody was interested in taking over the mill in this sort of capacity. As I mentioned before, it took a little while to get somebody on board, so the mill was sat here for a little while on its own, but the industry was still going. So there were a couple of mills, bigger mills running into the mid-80s around here, so it was hard to get somebody involved to take it on in this sort of capacity. But obviously it was, and we are still here to show you how a bobbin's made. And just to answer your question a bit more about why bobbin mills were here, so there were a lot. We were not the only one by any means. There were about 100 bobbin mills in the Lake District, 65 running at once. And the reason for this is geography. So as I mentioned before, we were part of Lancashire, we've got Manchester just below us. A lot of the bobbins were going down within the county, but also landscape. So there's plenty of land in the Lake District to grow wood and plenty of water to power the mills. So these two things came together to really make it the best place to make bobbins. And a lot of the, well, half of the woodlands in the Lake District we didn't have before the bobbin industry. A lot of them were planted specifically to make bobbins. But as the industry dies, you're not going to cut down the wood, it is what remains. So as you look across the Lake District and you see all that woodland, it is an industrial landscape. It's not necessarily what you would think of as an industrial landscape, but it is. The workforce, they were going, I think it's 1986 was the last one that closed, so it's, yeah, still going quite well into what's, yeah, the modern.
Do you ever think they'll revive it? Because, I mean, we need to get rid of plastics.
Yeah, that is true, but yeah, I think it's going to take a lot to actually introduce wood back in. And the amount of time that it takes. And the skill. And and you've got to grow the wood and all of these things. It's obvious when you're here and you see how much, how you can do it. But I think to people who run those businesses, it's not viable, it's more expensive. There's always that sort of niche market for things like that. So like toothbrushes are coming back in now. We've got toothbrushes for sale in the shop that are made of wood. You can get hold of them, but there's, until you ban things like straws and single-use plastics, it's not going to spontaneously come back, unfortunately. And if it does, it would be premium. You know, it's of course, specialised. And unfortunately, we couldn't do it here. So obviously, I've just made some bobbins, but we can only use the machines for historical demonstration purposes. Right. If we were to try and be commercial, we would have to adhere to a lot more health and safety standards. And that's the same. So as I pointed out, all of these things that they were making, you might have noticed they were all parts of things. So part of the Factories Act. If you were making a complete item, you had to adhere to a lot more health and safety standards. If you're just making parts of it, it wasn't as strict. And also because the bobbin industry was disappearing sort of in the 70s, 80s, they didn't enforce a lot of the health and safety standards that were enforced in other industries. Because if they had, then it would have just killed the bobbin industry sooner. And there were still quite a lot of people, being employed who wouldn't then necessarily have jobs. Which, one of the last bobbin mills to closed, I think, just a year before Booth's supermarket opened in Ulverston. So a lot of the women who worked there then just went to work at the supermarket. So they were some of the lucky ones. I think definitely when some of the bobbin mills were closing down previous to that, there wasn't much scope for employment. When the industry disappeared in the Lake District, it needed, there was that gap between industry and tourism, and those jobs were it was probably quite a difficult place to live in between that bit. So the last thing I'll say is about these small bobbins. So these ones, if you've got any of these at home, it's quite likely that they would have been made in the Lake District. It's not definite. There were some bobbin mills elsewhere. There were some cotton mills that had bobbin mills attached, but the vast majority of bobbins were made here. Unfortunately, bobbin mills didn't put their mark on the bobbins. It's all the cotton industry that did, so you can't actually trace it back to a bobbin mill, but you can say with reasonable confidence that it would have been made in the Lake District. So has anybody got any more questions? No, that's fine. So we'll head down these stairs just here. Just another reminder to mind your step as you go down, and if you think of any more questions, we'll ask as we go down, and we'll ask Tracy about how many
petition to get it all back working.
What would happen if you press the stop button?
I'm not sure that one. They might actually be attached to the line shaft downstairs. Because when we're running the line shaft downstairs, there's no one up here to try it. But it's probably further than one up here because there's so many line shafts and they all round each other.